I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. This is one of the most misquoted verses in the entire Bible. So often when it's used, what people are trying to say is, with Christ, I can do anything I put my mind to. But is that really what Paul is trying to say? In this video, we're going to take a deeper dive into Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. We're going to see it in its proper context, and we're going to learn what Paul is actually teaching here in this verse. You're going to understand that as we see it in its proper context, it changes everything. Over the years, this verse has been used for anything and everything, especially more so here recently. It seems to be, well, do you want to win the Super Bowl? I can do all things through Christ. Do you want to be a millionaire? Hey, I can do all things through Christ. Do you want to learn to fly? I can do all things through Christ. You see how dangerous it can be just applying that terminology of I can do all things through Christ to anything and everything. Over the years, this verse has been abused plenty.
Your Instagram bio says Philippians 4:13. And I'm curious what that verse of Philippians is and what it means to you.
I mean, that's my source of strength and determination and my purpose, really, because, you know, like anything that you do in life is going to require, you know, that undying faith in yourself and the belief that you can conquer anything. And for me, you know, through Christ, I get, you know, my strength and I can do all things. And so when I was a freshman in college, my mom texted me before my first practice, and she gave me a bunch of words of encouragement. Her favorite verse is Romans 8:28. So she's like, you need to pick a verse that, you know, you can go to when, you know, your times of need and give you that inspiration. So Philippians 4:13 was for me, and I still write it on my shoes to this day. Every pair of shoes.
You put 4:13 on there?
Philippians 4:13 with the little I can do all things, and it's just a great reminder. Obviously, you're always searching for purpose and why you're here, and for me, that's it.
As you can see over the years, this verse has been used for anything and everything except for what it's actually intended for. So what does this verse really mean? To find the real meaning of this verse, we need context. As always, I invite you to open up your Bible. Join me here in the book of Philippians, chapter number 4. We're going to start here in verse number 11. Notice what we have here. It says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." Notice that phrase, whatsoever state I am in. I think we'd all agree, if you know anything about Paul's life, he had a pretty big number of difficult situations he was in. He was stoned and left for dead outside of Lystra. He was imprisoned. He was shipwrecked. He was mocked. He was chased out of Damascus and lowered down in a basket. His life is considerably more difficult than ours. And yet through all that, he says there in verse 11, whatsoever state I am in, therewith to be content. So despite all his bad situations, he had learned to be content. I think we can all learn from that. And if you notice next there in verse number 12, it says, I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Notice some contrast here we have in the verse. Again, we're getting some context with the very next verse coming up being verse 13. So now we have learned that Paul, despite his difficult situations, he's learned to be content. Now we see here in verse 12, he says, I know both how to be abased and how to abound. A simple definition for abased is to be reduced to a low state, to be humbled or degraded. And naturally, these hard times Paul went through, he spent much of his life abased. He spent much of his life not thinking very highly of himself because God constantly reminded him through persecution who he really is. We're sinners by our very nature. But he said, I have learned how to be abased. He's learned how to be humble, how to be that lowly estate, if you will. But he's also known how to abound. So he has known how to pretty much have nothing, but also how to have everything. So he's learned that the bad and the good, if you will. He says, everywhere in all things I am instructed both, notice this, to be full and to be hungry. So notice again that contrast. He's noticed to abound and to be abased, to be full and to be hungry, But so very simply, we know what those mean. If full means you have need of nothing, hungry, you have need of your desperate needs. But as we see next at the end, both to abound and to suffer need. So again, we know abound is to have everything we need to have or possess. They are in great quantity, but also now to suffer in need. So we're seeing Paul is saying, I have all these problems in my life, but no matter what problems I have, I've learned to be content. Not only that, but I've learned to be abased and learned to abound. I've learned to be full and to be hungry and also to abound and to suffer need. So he's learned, as he said in the previous verse, no matter what state I'm in, abounding or abased, full or hungry, whatever state I'm in, I've learned to be content. I've learned to be satisfied with what God has given me. And again, I think we'd all agree when we look at Paul's life, his life was so much more difficult than ours. And yet he's learned to be content. So now look at verse 13. This is the verse that is so often misquoted. It's used for anything and everything. But notice what it says. It says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Okay, so when Paul wrote this, he's not thinking, I hope someone can win the Super Bowl. I hope someone can win the big game. I hope someone can, lift a lot of weights, or I hope someone can get an A on their test. When he's writing this, in its context, he's talking about all the difficult situations in life, and more specifically regarding Paul, he's talking about persecution and affliction. So when he says, I can do all things through Christ, he's not saying I can do anything I want. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So if you notice the context, Paul is saying that he has learned to be content despite his circumstances. I can do all things. So as we just saw, he says, I can be abased, I can abound, I can be full, I can be hungry, I can suffer in need. He can do all these different things. How can he do that? Because I don't know about you. I don't like being hungry. I don't like having great need. I don't like these problems in life. So how can Paul do these things and still be content? Well, it says it right there that I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. On his own, Paul cannot do it. But with Christ, he can. And even if you notice the next verse, we'll look at it just for the sake of the continuation of the context. He says in verse 14, notwithstanding, ye have done well. So in other words, nevertheless, despite the persecution, despite the hard times, you've done well, that ye did communicate with my affliction. Now, communicate there, it doesn't mean to talk as we do nowadays. The actual definition of the word communicate is to have or enjoy a share of. So when Paul says that ye did communicate with my affliction, he's telling this church here at Philippi, you are partaking in my affliction. So just as I am going hungry and suffering and being shipwrecked and stoned and all these problems, he says, I'm seeing y'all. Y'all are partaking in my affliction. You're a part of the journey. You're going through similar stuff that I'm going through. But he says, even because of that, despite of that, ye have done well. In other words, I can do all things through Christ because he strengthens me. And I've noticed you can do all things through Christ because he strengthens you. So as you can see, this verse is not about winning the Super Bowl or accomplishing some kind of a great task. This verse is about being content while suffering through real persecution and real affliction. I want to encourage you, the next time you go through a valley in life, you go through a hard time, you go through trials or persecutions or afflictions, I want to encourage you to keep your head up. Not because you're good and not because you can do it, but you want to keep your head up because he can do it. Christ can strengthen you, and it was his strength. You can do it just as Paul did it. The only reason Paul made it day to day, all through all this persecution, is because God was with him and Christ was strengthening him. When you're going through a hard time, persecution or affliction, I want to encourage you, lean on him. He's the one you need. I hope this was a blessing to you. If you learned anything from this video, please let me know down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel to stay in tune for future videos. Also, this style of video is kind of new to me. I'm working on editing skills, that kind of stuff. So you can let me know what you think about the new style of video as well down in the comments. I hope you have a great day today, and God bless.